Hey, everybody, and welcome once again to Time Out with Kevin Gallagher. It's a pleasure to have you here. We're live right now as we tape this on the 30th of November. I'm like, wow, 30th of November. This year has gotten really long in the tooth, if you know what I mean. But we're here every Friday night if you're watching us on TV, Channel 23, and that is Friday nights, 8:30 p.m. Replays the shows Monday at 11 a.m., so you can check that out. We've been running a series, as you know. We've been looking at the life and times around the time of Jesus Christ, particularly like around his birth, his life, what was going on politically with Rome and Herod and a lot of this stuff. And I have one of the two guys that I've been having on, which is Tim Kynes, and he's been researching this stuff for like 30 years. Now, folks, we're live as we tape this on the 30th. So we're here until 8 p.m. tonight. And if you have questions and you're watching us either on Twitch, YouTube, or on the Facebook page for the radio network, then what you can do is you can type in questions into the chat. I'll get them and relay them over to our guest. But if you're watching it on TV or something like that later, then you're out of luck. But hey, I'm Kevin Gallagher. Thank you for watching. And you might be interested. I always found it very fascinating. I know Tim will agree with me when you found out, hey, most of the theologians, a good number of them will agree on this date. You can do some searches in Google and such like that. And what you'll find is a lot of them will agree on this date of September 11, 3 BC as the actual birth date for our Lord Jesus Christ. And we are showing this program either on Christmas or right around Christmas, and we're actually going to talk about that date and what was going on that day and why that date is why most people, myself included, believe that that is the date on the Gregorian calendar that we will look at the actual date of the thing. I know we celebrate on December 25th. There's a lot of other reasons why that's done. We're not going to go there tonight, but we are going to look at the actual date, what was going on in the life and the times a little over 2,000 years ago. So what I want to do right now is welcome Tim to the broadcast and say, hello, Tim, how are you? And it's really good to see you again.
Good to see you again. Really thrilled to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. So what would you like to add that I already, from the opening, what would you like to add?
Well, I think a good way to start this is to simply state a few basic facts. And then what I would like to do, at least me personally, how I like to do this, is then I want to back up, maybe about a year and a half before Jesus was born and rebuild the timeline for people, because I probably should remind everybody that one of the premises behind my work, or one of the themes, or whatever the right word is, when I first discovered that Jesus was not born on December 25th, I made the assumption that the date changed, but that the story didn't really change all that much.
Yeah.
And over 35 years of research, I've discovered that that wasn't really the case at all, that the date changing radically changes the story. Okay. So what we're going to do tonight, what you and I have agreed to, and what we're going to talk about, is I want to paint the best picture I'm capable of what would have been happening on September 11th, 3 BC. What would that have looked like? But I do believe it's helpful, like I said, to back up, a year and a half before that, to share the chronology of what would have led up to that point. But I think we should just start by saying that the reason you and I believe that Jesus was born on September 11th, 3 BC on the Gregorian calendar is because of the sign given in Revelation chapter 12, verse 1, which is an astronomical sign that is rare enough. It's quite rare, as a matter of fact, that is rare enough that we can plug that into an astronomy program in a computer and wind the clock backwards and go, bang, because that is the sign that is given in Scripture. Now, I'm going to throw a lot of additional cross references into the works here that help us establish the fact that he was born in that year, in that month, on that day, and at that hour. But if you follow Revelation 12 verses 1 and 2, Behold, a sign and wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon underneath her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars, and she travailed in pain to be delivered. So it's telling you right there that this is the sign of the birth of Jesus Christ, Revelation 12, 1 and 2. So
It's
that's
pretty
where,
fascinating stuff. It really is.
yeah.
And I have, like, for example, I have a book here. This is an interesting one. I'll hold it up. It's loosely associated with the subject matter,
Mhm.
Jesus Christ, our Passover, and
Right.
there's a few other ones that will get into some very serious information about that, where there's been some pretty good research. And I know
Right.
that you have a couple of books that predate this stuff. And the thing is that all the feasts and everything, as we talked earlier today on the phone, all the feasts were signals or bookmarks
Oh,
towards what
yes.
God was going to do, and
Mhm.
he wrote everything in the stars. And I know that a mutual friend of ours, mutual acquaintance, Dale Sides, he works, there's astronomy programs, etc., that we do. And the thing is that you can measure the stars and where they were with an intricate, right down to the square inch accuracy. And that is
Absolutely.
not something that you or I or mankind, we can't go up there and say, I don't like where the position of this star is and move it.
Right.
It's way beyond our ability to do. So that witness that we have is unrefutable, because we don't have the ability to change the position of those stars and say,
Mhm.
well, we don't like where that is, so let's change it there. And when they go and they look, this is irrefutable empirical evidence that cannot be argued with, because we don't have the power to move those stars around.
Absolutely. So let me say a couple things about that, because you mentioned the feasts.
Yeah.
And I'll try to do this relatively quickly. It's important, but I don't want to belabor the point,
Yeah.
which is that when you research the feasts in the Old Testament, one of the predominant Hebrew words that is translated feast is the Hebrew word moed,
Yeah.
Moed, okay? Or moedim would be the plural, okay? Now, so when you read the feast of Passover, the feast of unleavened bread, et cetera, that's the moed, right? Now,
Yes.
when you do a word study of the Hebrew word moed, what you discover is that another translation of that same word would be the word rehearsal.
Okay.
Okay. So that means what the ancient Hebrews were doing is, on one hand, they were commemorating events that had already happened in the past, but they were also celebrating in advance events that would happen in the future. They were rehearsing them
Yes.
in the future. Okay. So that's part of what the Hebrew word moed means. But the very first use of the word moed in the entire Bible is in Genesis 1:14, where we are told that God set the sun, the moon, and the
Moon.
stars in the heavens for
Yes.
signs and seasons and days and years. And it's the English word seasons that is translated from the Hebrew word moed.
Yes.
See, so that's the scripture that tells us the very beginning of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, tells us that God set the sun and the moon and the stars in the heavens as rehearsals for things to come.
It's really amazing, isn't it? And it just still blows my mind to this day that those things can be done with such pinpoint accuracy. I believe in, and please fill in the details or correct me where I'm wrong, but when Jesus was born, we have that sign in Virgo, with
Yes.
the sun in her bosom, in her belly,
Mhm.
and then right below that is the constellation Draco, and it looks like he's getting ready to consume the child. And I'll give you an interesting little sidebar about that. You have to remember that in the Bible, they talk about 1/3 of the angels that rebelled against God, and you had that war in heaven. That constellation of Draco, that covers 1/3 of the stars.
Yes, it does. Yeah.
And so there's that telltale sign. And again, Masons, and a lot of the Masons, they are fascinated with the number 33. That would be a third. The guy that invented the long play record, he was a 33rd degree Mason. So records spin at 33 and a third to get long play. There's all kinds of interesting little tidbits that you come across when you look at the history of that, and the fact that there it is written right there in the stars as a witness of the coming Christ, and all these things being a foreshadowing of what was to come.
Yeah. And for the benefit of our listeners who might not know this, and are not as familiar with the material as you and I are, that reference that you made to the dragon and his tail,
Yeah.
drawing a third part of the stars. Well,
Yes.
the constellation Draco is a picture of a dragon. Okay,
Yes.
so that's what Kevin is talking about. And also the reference to that is in Revelation 12, the same place we have the reference to the woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet.
Yes.
They're both in Revelation chapter 12.
Now, would you say the 12 stars would be representative of the 12 tribes?
No, I don't think that's well, okay, there's two questions there. Okay.
Okay.
So on one hand, yes. Okay. When you go back to the dream that Joseph had in the Old Testament, okay, remember Joseph had two dreams. The first one was of the sheaves, that he and his brothers were gathering sheaves, and then his sheaves bowed down to him. And then the second dream he had said that the sun and the moon and the 11 stars
Bingo.
bowed down to him. Okay. So that clearly means that and here's the thing, Joseph did not interpret that dream. His family did. Read the record carefully. His father and his brothers, they knew what the dream meant when Joseph shared it. They didn't have to have it interpreted for him. They knew what it meant. So the sun represents Jacob. The moon represented Rachel, his mother, and then the 11 stars represented his 11 brothers.
Got it.
So therefore, we can infer from that he is the 12th star. He's the 12th constellation.
Got it.
So yes, each one of the 12 tribes is represented by one of the 12 major constellations in the heavens. So that's one half of the answer to that question. The second half to the answer to that question, however, is that when you get to Revelation 12 verse 1, I think we have a similar but slightly different reference, because it says, a woman clothed with the sun, the moon underneath her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. Well, I used to think that meant the ecliptic. Okay. The 12 constellations of the ecliptic. I don't think that's the case anymore, because like Joseph's dream, Joseph was accounting for the fact that he was represented one of the signs. Therefore, his brothers represented the other 11. Okay. So therefore, if Virgo is one of the sign and it said on her head was a crown of 11 stars,
right,
then I would say that's the ecliptic. But because it says it's a crown of 12 stars, I'm like, oh, no. There's something different going on here. And so then when you look at, if you bust out an astronomy program and you look for that sign, it is a woman clothed with the sun, the moon underneath her feet, and then above her head is the constellation Judah, or pardon me, Leo. But Leo represents the tribe of Judah. Okay. Virgo, by the way, represents the tribe of Zebulun. But the sign Leo represents the tribe of Judah, because both Leo and Judah are the royal sign and the royal tribe.
Right.
And we're going to get into that more here in a second as I describe the chronology of events that led up to the birth of Jesus Christ.
And when we look at those chronologies, John the Baptist and Jesus are kind of tied at the waist.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I sometimes will do a brain teaser with people and say, who is the greatest prophet ever listed in the Bible, who ever lived? And I have to agree with Jesus. Jesus said that it was John the Baptist.
Yes.
And people forget that. They'll bring up some great names, Elijah. You can go, you can go on and on. You can name some Moses, like who's heard of Moses?
Come on, Moses. Wow. Yeah.
But here's the thing is he said it was John the Baptist. So you have to really take a good, hard, close look at what was going on and what made him so special.
I mean, yeah, that's amazing. And the story of John, we could take a whole show and just talk about the birth of John the Baptist, because it's stunning in its own right. The fact that Zachariah and Elizabeth were well advanced in years. I mean, you clearly have a shadow of Abraham and Sarah, right? There's no
Yes.
question about
No
that.
question at all.
That they were well advanced in years, that they had never had children. And then you have this miraculous event where Gabriel appears to Zechariah in the holy place in the temple. I mean, that's serious. That is, to use a term that we wouldn't normally associate with the Bible. That's big medicine. That is a really big deal. So let me back up for just a second.
Go ahead.
And come back to Zechariah in just a sec. So let's start our timeline in the spring of 4 BC, okay? Because in the spring of 4 BC is when Joseph and Mary would have been betrothed. Now, here's another, we can do a whole nother show on this sometime, Kevin, if you want to do that. When you do an in-depth study of the Hebrew wedding ceremony and put Joseph and Mary in the middle of that scenario, the Bible comes alive like you wouldn't believe, because it's all there. Okay. So a Hebrew wedding began with a betrothal ceremony when they would have drawn up the marriage contract. The two families would have met. The contract would have been read, and they would have confirmed the covenant by drinking wine, which of course represents shed blood. So this is a blood covenant. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And once the betrothal is done in a Hebrew wedding, the couple is married. Okay. It takes an official divorce at this point to call it off. It's not like our engagement today where you could say, oh, I just decided not to go through with it and it's done. No, they were married at that point. They were officially married, but then Joseph would depart. The groom would depart for a year to go build the huppah, which is the wedding chamber where they would consummate their marriage a year later at the time that we would call the nuptials. Okay. So Joseph and Mary would have been betrothed in the spring of 4 BC. Okay. So now the next thing on the timeline would be Gabriel appearing to Zechariah, because that would have happened in June of 4 BC. Okay. And the reason we know that is because we are told that Zechariah was ministering in the temple according to the division of Abijah. So that's simply talking about how all the priests that ministered in the temple were divided up to minister in the temple at certain times during the year. And
they were scheduled.
The schedule
scheduled ahead of time.
Exactly. It's scheduled ahead of time. So if you know what that schedule looks like, it lands Zechariah ministering in the temple in June of 4 BC. And as we just said, Gabriel appears to him as he is burning incense on the golden altar of incense in the holy place, and Gabriel appears to him. I've heard it told, we don't know this for sure, of course, and I think it's a great mind picture. A fellow minister of mine said one time that he really believes that Gabriel just walked out of the Holy of Holies, which would make complete sense. Or he just, what's the word? He just, appeared out of the Holy of Holies, came right through the veil for all we know. But I think the fact that he
walked in or just appeared,
either one doesn't matter, but it's absolutely stunning. So we know the story. At this point, Zechariah would have gone home. Now, Zechariah lived in the hill country of Judea. Mm-hmm. That's not the right word. The evidence suggests that he only lived about 5 or 6 miles away. So that's, only a few hours walk, a day's walk to get home. And he would have been very excited at what Gabriel had told him and shared. Now he was, struck mute, couldn't speak, because he probably would have said something stupid. Frankly, I think that's the reason why Gabriel / God struck him mute, was to keep him from shooting his mouth off and saying the wrong thing. But through writing and hand gestures and stuff, he would have communicated with Elizabeth. And of course, nature would take its course, and they conceived, I believe, very quickly. So in other words, I believe that John would have been conceived in June of 4 BC, mid to late June of 4 BC. Okay.
Right.
So now we read scripture. We are told very plainly that 6 months later, in Elizabeth's 6th month, that is when an angel appeared to Mary in Nazareth and she conceived. Okay.
Got it.
We'll do the math. June, July, August, September, October, November, December. So Jesus was conceived in December of 4 BC. Okay. Very possible that he was conceived during Hanukkah, okay, in December of 4 BC, because the Bible is like this. Jesus said, I am the light of the world. Okay. And Hanukkah was the festival of lights.
Got it.
So it wouldn't surprise me for 1 minute that he would have been conceived during Hanukkah. We don't know that for sure, but it makes sense with how certain biblical evidence tends to work. So
Right.
Mary conceives in December of 4 BC. Okay. Now she's a virgin, right? So this is a part of the story that I don't think a lot of people realize. She would have concluded in her mind very quickly that she would have to leave Nazareth permanently. Okay. She was not going to be able to stay. Okay.
She would be stoned.
Because the possibility of being stoned or ostracized would be ridiculous. She couldn't do it, right? So I believe she determined in her heart that she had to leave, and that is part of why she decided to go visit Elizabeth in Judea, because she needed some counsel, right? Hopefully from an older, wiser woman. So this is the perfect opportunity. Plus, she's got to get out of town, right? She can't risk this being, discovered. So she travels to Judea, where we are told that she stayed with Elizabeth for 3 months. And then she returned back to Nazareth. Now, I believe this was a reconnaissance mission. She was going, because she was Judean. She's from the tribe of Judah. That is their tribal allotment. She happens to live in Nazareth because there was a mass migration of Judeans from the south to the north about 100 years prior to when Jesus was born, which is likely when both Joseph and Mary's ancestors arrived in Galilee. Okay. So then she travels to see Elizabeth. She spends 3 months there. And now she does her reconnaissance. She goes, okay, all right, so maybe this is the place. Maybe I move here, right? Elizabeth knows, presumably Zechariah knows at least a little bit about what's going on. She's had a chance to talk it over with Elizabeth. She's formulating a plan, okay? But I think between the two of them and the Holy Spirit, frankly, that Mary came to realize, well, I've got to go back because Joseph is part of the puzzle. Okay. I can't do this alone. I've got to be married, because I can't bring forth a child single, because then he'll never be accepted. So I've got to go back. I've got to take the risk. There's a really good insight. I've got to take the risk and go back to Nazareth, follow through with the marriage, and then tell Joseph. Okay. So that's what she does. So now again, do the math. If she was with Elizabeth for 3 months, she conceived in December. That means that January, February, March-ish of 3 BC is when she travels back to Nazareth and when John the Baptist would have been born.
Right.
Okay. So that is early spring of 3 BC. You've got John the Baptist being born and Mary returning to Nazareth and completing the marriage to Joseph and following through with the nuptials. Now, here's another one that we can spend a whole nother episode doing if you want, but I absolutely believe that Mary revealed to Joseph that she was pregnant. I know how it reads in scripture that she was discovered to have been pregnant, which makes it sound like it was public, but I don't believe that's the case. I believe that she told Joseph, and I believe she told Joseph on their wedding night in the chuppah.
And not to get too graphic, but then after they consummated the marriage, the proof would be in the sheets that they would have to present.
Absolutely, because that is the wonderful irony, but also what's the word I want to use?
Confirmation, perhaps.
Well,
Confirmation.
the serendipity of this whole thing is that she legitimately is a virgin, right? She's pregnant, but she's legitimately a virgin. They're about to do what you do on a wedding night, right? And she tells Joseph. Joseph gets really angry. That's not evident in the English. When you go into the Greek in that record, Joseph is livid. Okay. And then he basically rolls over to go to sleep. And it says that an angel appears to him in a dream and says, "Fear not to take Mary unto you as your wife." Right. And it's interesting because in the first half of the verse, they're together, but not married. And then in the second half of the verse, she's called his wife. Okay. So that means he woke up, they consummated the marriage. There, you would have had the tokens of virginity, the bloodstained sheets that he would have passed through the door to the best man, proving that they were married and that she was a virgin, which is amazing. Which by the way, without that, they weren't married. Okay. Right. That's Jewish law. Without that, they weren't married. And if they weren't married and they did, here's the thing. I know this will offend certain denominational and doctrinal thinking, but if they did not consummate the marriage, if Mary was a perpetual virgin, then they were not married. They were not legally married, which Jesus could not be the Messiah.
Right.
It's not possible. He can't be the Messiah if they're not legally married. It's not possible. So, at any rate, this is all in the spring of 3 BC. Okay. Now, very interesting because this has got to be in and around Passover-ish, right? So it's late March, early April. You're looking, early April, the 1st through the 8th of April in 3 BC was Passover, right? So you've got that. And then also right around this time, April, maybe May, this is when, because she tells Joseph she's pregnant. And now it's perfect because they're concealed in the huppah for 7 days. They've got all the privacy in the world to decide what they're going to do. Right. So she tells Joseph, they get a chance to talk about it. And then Joseph realizes, oh my God, we've got to get out of here. We got to
get out. Yeah, because the math doesn't add up.
Right. Well, meaning he realizes that the two of them now have to leave Nazareth. Okay. Mary had already concluded this, but now it becomes clear to Joseph as well. We've got to get out of here. Right. So and we've got to get out of here quickly because she's going to start to show very soon because she's only about 3, maybe 4 months in, and you don't have a whole lot more time when she's going to start to show. Okay. So here's the word I wanted: providential. That's the word I was searching for a minute ago. It's very providential that they were able to present the tokens of virginity. Right now, another providential event happens. The decree arrives from Augustus Caesar that all Judeans, especially Judeans from the house of David, the royal family, which both Joseph and Mary are, they've got to report to their ancestral hometown of Bethlehem to sign the oath of allegiance to Augustus Caesar. So, kaboom, look at this. There's the
excuse.
There's the excuse. Yep. They've got
to go.
Got to go. So God totally covers for them that they've got to beat feet out of Nazareth, and they've got the perfect cover story.
Yeah.
Right. Perfect cover story.
Nobody would question that at all.
Yep. And also you got to think about the fact that they would not have been the only Judeans who would have had to have done that. Because as I mentioned, there were a lot of Judeans living in Nazareth because of the migration 100 years before. Right. So there'd have been a lot of Judeans that would have had to have traveled to Bethlehem for the registration. Right now, there's a couple things that bear mentioning here, which is that there's some interesting things going on in the heavens. Right. In May of 3 BC, there was a conjunction between Saturn and Mercury, right? And Saturn also would have been moving eastward, okay? Eastward, not westward, eastward through the heavens. Now, I don't know if these are signs that the Magi witnessed, but I bring them up because these were notable astronomical signs. So at the very least, they might have gotten the Magi's attention, okay? But the but then there's another one, which is that on June 12th, okay, so it's right around this time, on June 12th of 3 BC, Venus and Saturn would have been in conjunction. And that would have started to get people's attention because conjunctions, that's what they do.
Not to interrupt, but just so that people know what that means. It means that the stars, the illusion, because of where we are on Earth and where those planets are, they get so close together that just like here, where my two fingers look like they're one.
Exactly.
This is what happens. And then that combined light makes it look like it's even bigger.
Exactly. Because if you hold one hand close to your face and another hand away from your face and realize that they represent the orbits of two different bodies, when they come to line up right like that, as you just said, they look like they're on top of each other. So the degrees of separation really matter because sometimes they appear, even this is a conjunction, but that's a more important conjunction. And that is a ridiculous conjunction. Okay.
Now, so, could the sign when he was born over Jerusalem with Virgo and the sun being in her belly and where Drago was, could that been something that the Magi saw and said, "Oh my"?
It's possible. And I've wrestled with this one for years. We don't know if the Magi saw that sign. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. It's hard to say.
It's hard to say.
It's hard to say whether they saw that sign, because one of the things I'm working on is that, you and I, we're familiar with what should be called Judean archaeoastronomy. Okay. It's archaeoastronomy means what ancient cultures believed and understood about astronomy. Okay. And Judean simply means ancient Judea, right? But the Magi were Parthians, okay? Now, I believe due to the, what's the word I want to use? The succession of the Magi, because 600 years earlier, we have to remember, Daniel was appointed chief of the Magi in the Babylonian court, okay? And if Daniel understood this stuff, then this is how the Magi knew 600 years later what to look for, okay, is because a secret society of Daniel's followers would have just passed this down over the years and said, there it is. But something I've been working on is I really wonder if there is an intersection between Judeo-archaeoastronomy and what the Parthian Magi would have looked for as part of their own astronomy. Because one of the things that they recorded, this is really stunning stuff, right? There was an ancient library in the Assyrian capital of Nineveh, okay, under King Ashurbanipal. And from this one library alone, this doesn't even include the rest of the Middle East, we have recovered 30,000 clay tablets in cuneiform text, okay? Wow. And from these 30,000 tablets, number one, this is where we get the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is how we know the Epic of Gilgamesh survived, is it's in these clay tablets, right? But also in these clay tablets is the Enuma, Anu, and Enlil, which is the Babylonian star diary, okay? It's their star encyclopedia. And one of the things that these guys recorded meticulously was called the heliacal rising of a star. So the heliacal rising of a star is it pops up above the horizon right before the sun, okay? So it's super bright because the sun is right on its tail, right? And so now 20 or 30 minutes is going to go by and you won't be able to see it anymore because the sun's going to pop up over the horizon. But when a planet would pop up above the horizon like that, this was a really big deal. And the Magi made a big deal about recording the heliacal risings of Jupiter and Venus in particular, year after year after year after year. Okay. This is what brings me to my next point, which is on August 12th of 3 BC, Jupiter and Venus would have been in an extremely tight conjunction in their heliacal rising before dawn in the constellation of Leo. Now, for people who are going, well, Tim, what does all that mean? Well, what I just told you is that Venus, the bright and morning star, which is a designation for Jesus in the book of Revelation, and Jupiter, which is the king planet, were in conjunction, in a very, very, very tight conjunction, in the royal constellation of Leo, near the planet Regulus, which is the king planet, okay, in their heliacal rising.
Yeah.
See, that's the thing. It was in their heliacal rising, which is something that the Magi would have went, oh my God, look at that, right? That would have really
freaked them out. Really freaked them out.
Right. That would have really caught their attention, right? And take note, that is August 12th, 3 BC. Mary is about 8 months pregnant, okay? Because they've traveled to Bethlehem, right? And they've been staying there. They've been just staying with relatives this whole time. They arrived in May or June, and they've just been hanging out in Bethlehem for several months. And now the time is approaching that she is going to deliver her baby. Okay. So this brings us to what you and I really had planned to talk about, which is, okay, well, what does this look like? Right? What does the whole scenario look like? Well, number one, it's summer. Right? It's summer in Israel. Now, if you do the longitude and latitude of Bethlehem, it is the same as El Paso, Texas, or Ensenada, Mexico. Okay. So north-south wise, it's pretty warm. It's not cold. It's not a cold winter's night. Okay. This is late summer. Okay. In a relatively, mild climate, right? Mediterranean, like I said, same as El Paso, Texas, or Ensenada, right? So in the daytime, it's still got to be 80s and 90s out. It's very warm during the day, right? And then at night, that means, it's probably in the 60s at night. It's really not a thing, right? But you're getting to late summer, which means they would have gone through the days of awe, okay, which is the Hebrew month of Elul, right? Which is when they're preparing for the fall feasts, because that means the Feast of Trumpets is coming up reasonably soon, and then Yom Kippur, and then the Feast of Tabernacles. Okay, these are coming up quickly. So a big part of what's going on in the background here is that Joseph and Mary and their extended family, they're preparing for this. They're preparing their hearts before God with repentance and things like that to gear up for the fall feasts is really what's going on here. But it's warm out. It's very, very pleasant. They are approaching a very, very solemn time of the year with regard to Yom Kippur, but then also a very, very, very festive time of the year with the Feast of Tabernacles. That's really a big deal. That is the pinnacle of their feasts. Okay.
Yeah, it's a huge deal, and the feasts were everything,
right? And once again, going back to what we talked about earlier, that a feast is a moed; it's a rehearsal, right? It's a rehearsal, so it's very interesting. So they would have been preparing themselves physically, mentally, spiritually for the fall feasts, and of course, Mary, she's paying attention to the fact that, well, okay, I'm 8 months pregnant, 8.5 months pregnant, and the time clock is ticking down for her to be delivered, right? So that is really what's going on here. But as we have talked about in other shows, it's not winter, it's not a cold winter's night, it's warm, it's pleasant, and they would have been staying in a traditional Judean home, because we have learned that when it says there was no room for them in the inn, it means there was no room for them in the kataluma, no room for them in the guest room. Okay.
Okay.
So they were staying in a traditional Judean home with extended family. There is the possibility that some of the family slept on the roof of the house because
It was warm enough.
it was warm enough. It's pleasant outside to do that. It's a great time of year to sleep outside, frankly, right? But then as the day approaches, right, as she's getting closer, the women in the family, they're anticipating this. They're making sure that the local midwife, if there wasn't one in the family, they're making sure that the local midwife would have been aware that, okay, Mary's going to pop any day now. So, we're going to come get you, at the right place and the right time, right? And then, of course, as you start to really get close to the day of delivery, of course, you've got the fact that she's going to go into labor, right?
Yeah.
Good old-fashioned labor. Pre-labor and then labor. And, 16, 20, 24 hours later, she's going to deliver, right? So she would have gone into labor and then gone through that whole thing. The women would have kicked the men out of the house. You guys go out there and stay away from us because we got a baby to deliver.
Yep.
Go boil some water or
we got work to
do something useful. We got important stuff to do, where the women would have focused on, delivering the baby. Okay. And then of course the piece of the puzzle that really brings it all together is that, so she's, it's a first child. So, 16 to 20 hours of labor is reasonable. Right. So that would have started, the night before, right? Or actually the morning before is probably the better way to say it. So, you just this conjecture, but you get the idea that, oh yeah, she wakes up with a contraction at 3 o'clock in the morning. And it's like, oh,
here we go.
Here we go. And then throughout the day, the contractions get closer. And then by, late afternoon, early evening, she's in full blown labor. This is happening. And that Jesus would have, now, if you believe as I do, which is that, so that sign that we talked about, Revelation 12:1, woman clothed with the sun, moon underneath her feet, right? I'll do this on camera here. Let's do it this way. So if you're looking at me, my elbow is the feet of Virgo and my hand is her head.
Okay.
She's tipped upside down and the horizon is going right through the middle of her body. The setting sun is right smack in the middle of her body, and the setting moon is over here under her feet. Okay. So now I've kind of juggled this around because that full sign, right? A woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars, right? You can't see that whole thing in the heavens at one time. It's not possible. You would have to have seen half of it in the morning and half of it in the evening.
When they were tracking Venus.
Right. See, and this is how celestial observation worked at that time, is you had the evening and the morning observation. Remembering, of course, that in Hebrew reckoning, the evening and the morning were the first day. Okay. Evening is what starts the day. So the evening observation would be as the sun is going down and then it gets dark enough to see the stars, right? And then the morning observation is flipped over. It's the reverse. It's that everything is dark and then the sun comes up and then you can't see anything. So, but someone who is observant and knew what to look for would have been able to take the constellation Leo and the constellation Virgo and put them together and went, oh my God, there it is. It's a woman clothed with the sun, the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars, right? So that's a very interesting thing. But my point being is that the woman clothed with the sun part of that occurred when the sun was setting and when the moon was setting. And I can't prove this, but I just believe it's correct because we are told, here you go, we are told that the shepherds, okay, were watching their flocks by night.
Mhm.
Now, this is another indicator of what time of year it was, because shepherds, this is a classic argument. Everybody's heard this one. If you've ever talked about this, shepherds didn't watch their flocks in open field in the winter. They didn't do that. They put them in sheepfolds in the winter. They had them in open field in the warmer weather, and then brought them in when it started to rain in November. Okay. So they're still in open field, and it says they're watching their flocks by night. So if it's the first watch of the night, that means it's dusk. That means the sun is going down. It's dipping below the horizon. So I personally believe that Jesus was born between the time that the sun set and the moon set, because that meant that the sign would have disappeared and you couldn't have seen it.
So that would be maybe sometime around 7:15, 7:30 in the evening?
Yeah, somewhere between about 6:30 and 8 o'clock.
Okay.
Yep, 6:30 and 8 o'clock. And now to really put the picture together, because this is what you got to we need one of those, like you did with the screen here. We need to put up multiple pictures on the screen at the same time. In their house in Bethlehem, Mary is in labor. Okay. In the open fields, there's a bunch of shepherd cooking their evening meal, getting ready to just hang out for the evening.
And let me add, were these the Levitical shepherds? Not to belabor the point, but just, is that true?
It's highly possible. There's a couple of different theories. One theory is it's just ordinary shepherds. Okay. But the other theory is that these were Levitical shepherds who were watching Levitical flocks. In other words, it would have been sheep deliberately intended to be the sacrificial sheep for the temple. Okay. And that they would have been watching from the Migdal Eder, which is a tower on the outskirts of Bethlehem, that would have been the watchtower that they would have been watching from. And the Migdal Eder is given as a sign in the Old Testament that the Messiah would come from near the Migdal Eder. Okay. So that's very
another
likely.
note, another notation. Yeah.
Another reference. See, another reference. All these pieces of evidence coming together at once, right? So Mary is in labor. They're getting ready for the night watches when, of course, angels appear, right? And if you cross-reference the reference in Luke, okay, where the angels appear to the shepherds, and you cross-reference that with Hebrews chapter 1, I believe this was every angel in creation. Okay, laid out in military formation, because the commander-in-chief has just been born. And because it says that the shepherds, they rubbed their nose in the dirt because they were so afraid of these angels. And who wouldn't be at a site like that all of a sudden they just appear out of nowhere, and it's an army of angels as far as the eye can see, right? I would be in the dirt too, right? Wow. But here's the amazing thing is Mary's in labor.
Yeah.
The angels are blowing the minds of these shepherds, and 6 miles away in the temple in Jerusalem, the priests are blowing shofars because it is the first. It's the first day of Tishri. Yeah. It is Rosh Hashanah. It is Yom Teruah. It is the Feast of Trumpets, which is the day they crowned their kings.
And that's when they honored the king's birthday.
Yeah, exactly.
And even if the king was born on a different day, this is the day that they would honor his birthday, just like with racehorses. It's it doesn't matter what day of the year the horse was born on, say here in 2021 when we're taping this, his birthday would be January 1st, and all those horses would have the same birthday. And then all the 1-year-olds would race against each other, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, etc. And this was the same idea, kind of. They would honor his birthday on that day every year. And what do you know? Jesus is born on the King's Day.
Yep. So that's exactly correct. It's a very, very similar concept. That was the day they reckoned the regnal years of a king's reign. So I mean, so there you have it. I mean, that's the three major events. Now the Magi, they're still back in Parthia watching the stars.
Yeah.
They're not here this night. Sorry, guys. Your manger scene doesn't
all
quite
wrong.
work. They're not there yet. They're still back in Parthia looking at the night sky going,
something interesting
something's going on, right? But yeah, so you got Mary in labor, right? And here's the thing. You got Mary in labor. She delivers, right? And then they wrap him in swaddling clothes. Okay.
And he's only kept in those clothes for a very short time.
Very short time. They would have washed him in salt water to clean him off. And then they wrap him in these strips of cloth. They would have put his arms and legs out straight and wrapped him up like a mummy and then dedicated him and prayed over him, right? That he would walk uprightly and that he would, walk the straight and narrow, so to speak. That's why they would bind his arms and legs straight like that. Okay. And of course, we know that the shepherds were given the sign that they would find him wrapped in swaddling clothes and laid in a manger. And so back to our other piece of evidence here is the fact that the manger is in the living room, right? They're not in a stable. They're in a traditional Judean home, because part of a traditional Judean home was the area where they would have kept the animals, which would have been moved out. Okay, by the way.
Yeah.
For the women to be there giving birth, they would have just moved the animals out of there, right? But the feeding trough would have been right there on the ledge.
And it would be a convenient place to put a baby.
Right. And remember, this is an overcrowded Judean home because family has traveled there for the registration and now for the fall feasts.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So it's not surprising at all that instead of, a small family of 4 or 6 people being in this house, maybe there's 12 or 15 or even
20
people crammed in this house. So there's no room in the guest room. So Joseph and Mary are sleeping in a large open area, just like everybody else. And the manger, that makes a perfect makeshift bed for the kid.
Yeah. Yeah,
there it is.
Absolutely amazing, isn't it? It's
yeah.
I got just let's see, about 4 or 5 minutes left. What would you like to add before we go off the air?
Well, we know that there's more to the story. Okay. I mean, we wanted to focus on this tonight because this is the equivalent of what we celebrate, for lack of a better term, during Christmas. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We are honoring the birth of the Savior of the world. And this is what that birth would have looked like in the fall, in warm weather. Jesus surrounded by loving family. They were not outcasts. Okay. They weren't out in the cold. There was no evil innkeeper that pushed them out into the cold. The shepherds would have shown up at this really amazing timing to find the baby wrapped in swaddling clothes. And of course, the angels, I mean, that's just stunning beyond belief. And then the fact that they are, like I said, they are blowing 6 miles away in the temple. They're blowing shofars to announce the birth of the king. So that's the picture of what we're seeing. But of course, we know the story isn't quite over yet. In about 15 months, these enigmatic wise men from the east are going to show up with an army to back them up. 100 wise men, 1,000 camels, 1,000 infantry, 3,000 cavalry, all their family and their entourage show up at the court of Herod the Great and say, oh, yeah, by the way, where's the real king?
Yes. And if you want to know about that, you can go back to earlier programs that we have listed in Twitch, on YouTube, and you can find it in our Facebook pages, on the radio network, and you can locate that there and watch it. It's a great education. What would be the one thing in the few minutes we have left, maybe in the 3 minutes we have left, that you would really want people to know that maybe we've been taught a lot of mythology, so to speak, a lot of tradition, that we get taught the traditions of men instead of many times what the Bible actually teaches.
Right.
What is the one thing that you would want people to know about this event more than any other?
I think it's the reality of it, right? I really do. For me, it's that this makes the story, frankly, much more real to me, right? That would God allow his son to be born alone in the cold?
Yeah, exactly.
I really don't think so, right? So the fact that it would have been Joseph and Mary with extended family, the Jewish tradition of the midwives and stuff like that. It's warm, it's pleasant outside. The fall feasts are upon them, which is a very combination of very solemn and
Yeah,
festive time. That
yeah,
makes complete sense. So the thing to take away is, number one, it makes it very real, but then also look at the extraordinary evidence that all points towards this day and this time. The
yeah,
Hebrew feast, the fact that it's a moed, the fact that it's not just any Hebrew feast, it's the Hebrew feast where they reckon the regnal reign of kings. Also, up above them in the heavens, little do they know, you've got Revelation 12:1. The
yeah,
woman clothed, because that's on the western horizon as Jesus is being born.
yeah, yeah.
If someone would have walked out there and looked, who knew what to look at, they
Looked
would have
up.
went,
Yeah,
there it is.
there it is.
There it is. There's the woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet.
Yep.
It's
It's
it's all
amazing stuff, Tim.
it's all happening at the same
We'll
time.
we'll get into some more of this. We'll be doing some other shows, and
Yes,
I
sir.
just want to thank you so much for joining me here tonight. This is probably airing, I think, Christmas night. As we tape this and get it on TV. So it's
Mhm.
real important that people understand what actually happened apart from the mythology that's been built around the event. And folks, I thank Tim and Tim, hang out. We'll talk after the
Sure.
taping. And folks, I'm Kevin Gallagher. I thank you for joining us here. Remember, you can catch all the shows on our Facebook page. You can go to the radio network. You can go to timeoutyoutube.com. You can go to kevingallagher.me. There's a blog. Just put my name that you can see right there in the corner. Go into a search engine, you'll find tons and tons and tons of stuff. We've been doing the show for like 25 years. So you can hear the show, replays of the show. You can hear it on the radio network, 9 p.m. on Friday nights. That's Eastern time. So check that out when you get the chance. And folks, again, for Tim Kynes, I'm Kevin Gallagher. Please tune in again next week to see what it is we'll be talking about. Until then, have a great night and God bless you.